Hi, I am Sherlock. Welcome to my new mystery case.
I confess that in all the years I shared rooms with Mr. Sherlock Holmes at Baker Street, few messages arrived with such quiet malice as the one that set in motion the affair of the man who smiled after death. It came on a raw November morning when the fog had lain all night like damp wool across the streets, and the lamps still burned at 8 o'clock, as if resentful at being asked to yield to day. Mrs. Hudson had just brought in the urn when a neat, dark-haired clerk of perhaps 25 was shown up by our landlady, his hat twisting anxiously in his hands. Holmes, who had been seated cross-legged in his armchair with the violin across his knees, regarded the fellow with that peculiar, contemplative brightness which to the world signified indifference, and to me a focusing of faculties as keen as any surgeon's scalpel. "You come from St. James's, but not by way of the main thoroughfare," he observed before the man had finished a bow. "You cut across the park to avoid the cabs, were splashed by a cart at the Horse Guards Arch, and wrote your note in haste in a vestibule that smells of varnish. The paper, moreover, is from a private club and not your office." The young man actually laughed, one of those short, astonished barks which are half admiration and half fear. "That is quite right, sir. I am Mr. Lionel Ashcroft, secretary to Sir Alistair Penruddock. I have, as you say, come from St. James's, from the Darnley Club." Holmes inclined his head as if the matter were settled. "The varnish is from the new coat upon the hall benches. It clings. Your sleeve bears a faint, glossy patch. The splash upon your right boot is the chalky mud peculiar to the arch after rain. But pray be seated, Mr. Ashcroft. What misfortune brings the Darnley Club to Baker Street at such an hour?" The clerk produced, with a hand that trembled, a sealed envelope of thick cream paper. "Sir Alistair is dead, Mr. Holmes. He was found shortly after 6 this morning in the conservatory of his house in Belgrave Square, seated as if in repose, smiling. The police were called at once. Yet this—" he touched the envelope as though it were an adder. "This was waiting at the club when the porter opened at 7. It is addressed to you." Holmes took the envelope between forefinger and thumb and held it to the lamplight. "Club stationery, as predicted. The gum has been damped with a perfumed water, violet, I think, and there is a trace of cigar ash upon the flap that is not of the ordinary London blend. Watson, would you be so good?" I cut the paper carefully. Within lay a single photographic print, very clear and sharp in the morning dimness, and a slip of paper upon which, in a small, educated hand, were written 8 words. He smiled because he knew me in the dark. The photograph I shall never forget. It showed the long, glass-roofed conservatory, the exotic plants drooping like green curtains, and in the wicker chair at the centre, a man of near 60, with a noble brow and a silvered moustache sitting very straight, his head a fraction to the side, the lips drawn into a faint, gentle curve. There was no mockery in it, no horror, rather the ghost of amusement one sees upon the features of a man who has just solved a private riddle. "Sir Alistair," said Ashcroft hoarsely. "Philanthropist, Member of Parliament, railroad director, known to all London. Scotland Yard believes— well, they will believe what Lestrade believes when he arrives. He is already at the house. But I could not shake the feeling that— this smile— there is something wrong, Mr. Holmes." Holmes's eyes had narrowed to slit. He took the photograph to the window, then to the firelight, as if heat and cold might each release a secret from the paper. "This is not a Yard photograph," he murmured. "Note the angle. The vantage is from the western end of the palm bed, not from the doorway, where a policeman would naturally stand." The exposure is better than the usual police work, and the print was made in haste. See the rough trimming along the bottom edge. Whoever took it was familiar with the house, had time before the authorities arrived, and wished to communicate with me before breakfast. Ashcroft sank forward. Good heavens! Holmes handed me the slip of writing. Observe the ink, Watson, a blue-black, recently filled. The strokes show pressure on the downstrokes, the habit of a man who signs often and with authority. The perfumed gum and the club paper speak to one of some standing. The ash suggests a foreign cigar, Turkish or Levantine, rolled tighter than our Havana. Mr. Ashcroft, did Sir Alistair entertain last night? The secretary moistened his lips. A small dinner, 2 directors of the Midland and Northern, a lady, Lady Eugenia Vale, a widow of some note, and Mr. Percival Dane, the barrister. They parted at 11. Sir Alistair retired to his library. I left before midnight. He was found at dawn. Found by whom? The butler, Crick. He opened the house at 6, as always, and went to draw the conservatory blinds. He says the door was fastened upon the inside with the bolt. The windows were closed. Sir Alistair sat as you see, with that dreadful smile. Dreadful? I protested. It seems almost peaceful. Peaceful in a corpse is dreadful. Ashcroft returned with sudden heat, then apologized. Forgive me, Doctor, he was my employer for 7 years. Holmes's fingers moved restlessly upon the violin's neck. You say the door was bolted from the inside. Was it forced? The gardener fetched a tool and lifted a pane, one of the small hinged panes, high up, and unlatched it. Then they drew the bolt. Inspector Lestrade maintains that no man could have left without being seen. The night footman swears he heard no one. Holmes was already in motion. Hat, coat, cane. Come, Watson, there is nothing so conducive to breakfast as a locked door and a smiling dead man. Holmes, I ventured as we descended, you have some theory already. My dear fellow, I have possibilities, no more. One smiles after death in 3 common circumstances, and perhaps 100 uncommon ones. There is the sardonic grimace of certain poisons, there is the mortuary's officious art, and there is a voluntary smile achieved just before the end by a man who knows the hour. I shall be interested to discover which of our 3 is at play, and who sent me the photograph to hurry me toward it. Belgrave Square was a grey bowl of silence when we arrived, the houses looking down their noses at the world. Sir Alistair's residence betrayed its agitation only by the cluster of curious onlookers and the yard's plain wagon at the curb. Lestrade met us in the vestibule, his ferret face pinched with cold and suspicion in equal measure. "So they've sent for you, Mr. Holmes. I suppose a smile is enough to bring the great man running." Holmes inclined his head pleasantly. "And a bolt upon the inside to bring the great Lestrade to a standstill. Shall we?" The conservatory smelt of wet earth and geranium leaves. It was a handsome chamber, long as a chapel, with a black and white tiled floor and a central path flanked by palms and ferns. In the midst was the wicker chair. Sir Alistair Penruddock sat as in the photograph, upright, hands resting lightly upon the arms, the head a trifle canted. The smile was there, unmistakable, delicate, as though the mouth knew something the brain did not. Holmes's attention went everywhere at once. He paused at the door bolt, stooped to examine the tiles, and then, with that cat-like grace of his, glided to the high louved panes. He sniffed a leaf, peered at a smear upon the brass latch, and crouched to study a pale crescent mark upon the floor, half hidden beneath the chair. "What do you make of it, Mr. Holmes?" Lestrade demanded, arms folded. "I make of it that your men are to be congratulated," Holmes returned blandly. "They have touched very little." He looked to me. "Watson, your nose is better than mine in matters medicinal." Do you detect anything?" I bent, feeling the old soldier doctor stir within me. There was no almond bitterness in the air, none of that sinister hint I had encountered in other rooms of death. But there was a faint metal tang, like a coin rubbed between finger and thumb, and something sweet, not floral, but syrupy, which seemed to cling to the wicker. "Not cyanide," I said slowly. "Possibly chloral, though I should not swear it." Holmes's eye brightened. Just so, Mr. Ashcroft, was Sir Alistair in robust health? As robust as a man of his years. He took a draught at night, a sleeping cordial, prescribed by Dr. Merton. He suffered from wakefulness. "Ah!" Holmes's finger tapped the chair arm. "Lestrade, you have, I hope, secured the decanter and glass from the library." "We have," said the inspector, a trifle too promptly. "Excellent! And you have noted this?" Holmes indicated the pale crescent I had seen. It was the print of a heel, the smallest segment only, but upon it, plain as a signature, was the cross-hatched edge of a rubber protector, such as I had seen on the shoes of ladies who walk in gardens. "A woman's heel," I breathed. "Or a man's who wears such things, which would be a fact of even greater interest," Holmes remarked dryly. "Observe, too, this wax upon the window latch, beeswax smeared thinly, the sort used to silence a squeak. Someone anticipated using this window and made provision. And here, black ash, very fine, fallen upon the fern frond, not from a pipe, a cigarette rolled tightly, Turkish, I think." Lestrade snorted. "Ah, all very pretty, Mr. Holmes, but how did the murderer walk through a bolted door?" Holmes's smile, very different from the dead man's, showed a flash of teeth. "Inspector, if you engage me to explain only the doors, you must accept a discount from my fee. I am retained by the smile as well." He turned to Ashcroft. "Tell me of last night's company again, if you please." The secretary named them, and as he spoke the house seemed to lean closer. Lady Eugenia, graceful and unassailable, whose husband had perished admirably in the mutiny. Dane, the barrister with a reputation for cross-examination that bled witnesses dry. The railway men with their comfortable waists and anxious eyes. Each name placed a figure in the room like a chessman set at opening. Holmes did not ask the obvious questions. Instead, he knelt once more by the wicker chair and lifted, very gently, Sir Alistair's left hand. Between forefinger and thumb there was a minute roughness, no more than a pin's kiss, and upon the skin, almost too faint for sight, a darker speck. He did not touch it. He only looked, and then he looked at the smiling face. "He smiled because he knew me in the dark," he repeated softly as if to himself. "Come, Watson. We have seen what the yard has seen, and perhaps a little they have not. The air here is heavy. I should like to examine Sir Alistair's library and speak with his butler next. Mr. Ashcroft, send a boy to the Darnley Club. Ask whether any of last night's guests smoke Turkish cigarettes. Oh, and inquire, too, which of them is fond of violets." "Violets?" said Lestrade. Holmes tapped the envelope in his pocket. "Perfume is the most indiscreet of accomplices, Inspector. It tells you who has been in the room long after the door is shut." He straightened, his expression turned inward. "A locked room, a drowsing cordial, a silenced window, and a smile. It is a beginning. Let us see whether it leads to the truth, or only to another more artful smile yet." Holmes led the way into Sir Alistair's library, that solemn sanctum where a man's intellect and private nature most often betray themselves. The room was long and panelled, lined with books whose spines glowed dully in the weak light. On the broad desk near the fire lay the detritus of a working night, correspondence, a silver inkstand, and a cut-glass decanter beside an empty tumbler. Holmes moved through it all with the restless precision of a hound on scent, touching nothing but seeing everything. I, meanwhile, could not resist glancing toward the high-backed chair where Sir Alistair had perhaps sat only hours earlier, unaware that death waited in the next room behind the flowering palms. Holmes paused before the decanter. "Watson, observe the sediment along the glass bottom," he murmured. "A cloudy line, as though a powder had been dissolved here. Our friend's sleeping draught, perhaps, but note that the decanter is not the same type used by apothecaries. It belongs to this set of 4, which hold port and brandy. This one, however, smells faintly of almond and ether." I sniffed cautiously. "You're right. That is no ordinary cordial." "Precisely. A mixture may have been poured into this vessel after it left the doctor's hands. I shall require Dr. Merton's prescription list before the day is out, but first— here we are." Holmes bent over the blotter, holding it close to the light. "Someone tore away a note, but left the imprint of the writing. Watson, the pencil, if you please." I shaded lightly across the surface as Holmes directed. Gradually a few words took shape, fragmentary but unmistakable. "Tonight in the conservatory, alone, you promised silence." And below, half a name ending in "near." "Eugenia," Holmes said quietly. "Lady Eugenia Vale. A rendezvous, Watson, arranged and secret. That alters the complexion of things. A gentleman of 60, widowed but still vigorous, invites a widow of charm to meet him in private. The smile grows less mysterious and more human, does it not? You think it was a lovers' meeting? I think that Lestrade's case of suicide will soon evolve into one of blackmail, or worse." He moved to the hearthrug, where a faint ring of dust marked the carpet. "This too is curious. Something heavy stood here until very recently. The dust outlines a small pedestal, perhaps a statuette or clock, yet it is gone. Taken last night, most likely, for the dust has not been disturbed by this morning's commotion." The butler, Crick, was summoned. He was a pale, precise man whose every gesture proclaimed discipline and discretion. Holmes regarded him with genial detachment. "You found your master this morning, I understand. Tell me exactly what you observed." "I drew the curtains in the hall, sir, and then entered the conservatory by the inner door. Sir Alistair was seated as usual, though I perceived instantly that something was amiss. When I spoke and he did not reply, I went closer, and then I saw the expression. I ran for Mr. Ashcroft and for help." "Did you notice if anything was missing?" Crick hesitated. "Not at first, sir. But later, when the police came, I saw that the small marble bust of Minerva was gone from the stand beside the window. It had been there last night." Holmes's eyes flickered with satisfaction. "Who had access to this room after dinner?" "Only Sir Alistair and myself, sir. The gentlemen took their coffee here briefly, then went to the drawing-room with Lady Eugenia. I removed the cups and retired. His valet tells me Sir Alistair dismissed him at midnight." "When you closed the house, were all doors secure?" "Yes, sir. I personally checked the bolts." "Good. That will be all for now, Mr. Crick." When the butler had gone, Holmes turned to me with that gleam of suppressed excitement I knew so well. A vanished statuette, a perfumed letter, a secret meeting, and a smiling corpse. Each item by itself might mean little, but together they hum like strings upon one instrument. Let us tune them until they strike harmony. Lestrade entered at that moment, his expression grim. "Post-mortem's ordered. Doctor thinks the old gentleman died around midnight. Heart failure or some sleeping poison. No signs of struggle. Clean case of accidental overdose, if you ask me." Holmes's brows lifted. "And if I do not ask?" Lestrade shrugged. "Then you'll make it complicated, as usual. I'm sending the cordial to the lab. We'll know in a few hours." "Admirable," Holmes said. Meanwhile, may I suggest you inquire whether Lady Eugenia Vale possesses a key to this house? Lestrade frowned. A key? She's a guest, not a burglar. Indeed, said Holmes, and yet sometimes the line between hospitality and burglary is thinner than one supposes. She will deny it, of course, but her coachman will not. I should also like to know where she obtained her cigarettes. When the inspector had departed with a muttered comment about theatrical nonsense, Holmes seated himself and steepled his fingers. The fog outside pressed against the windows like grey velvet. Watson, he said at length, there are few motives that drive a respectable lady to enter a man's locked house after midnight. Love is one, fear another. I wonder which applied to Lady Eugenia. Before I could reply, the door opened and Mr. Ashcroft reappeared, visibly agitated. Mr. Holmes, news from the club. They say Lady Eugenia smokes Turkish cigarettes exclusively imported by a tobacconist in Vigo Street. And there's something else, a footman. There swears he saw a woman leave the club late last night wearing a long dark cloak and a veil. He thought nothing of it then. Holmes rose instantly, his energy rekindled. The club is but a few streets from Belgrave Square. A veiled lady departing near midnight. Yes, it fits admirably. And now, my dear Watson, we must pay a call upon Lady Eugenia before the Yard does. If she is guilty, she will hide it. If she is innocent, she will fear us. Either way, we shall learn more from her face than from a dozen depositions. As we left the house, the fog began to lift slightly, revealing the gleam of wet cobbles and the blurred outlines of the carriages. Holmes paused to light his pipe, the match flaring briefly against the mist. "Do you perceive, Watson," he said between puffs, "how this case grows? A dead man who smiles, a locked door, and a letter hinting at secrecy. We stand, I fancy, not at the end of the riddle, but at its beginning. For every smile there must be a cause, and, I suspect, the cause in this instance is still very much alive." Lady Eugenia Vale received us at her town residence on Upper Brook Street with a composure that was, to my mind, almost theatrical. She was tall, dark-eyed, and striking rather than beautiful, the kind of woman whose silence seems charged with deliberate meaning. Her drawing-room, fragrant with violets, confirmed the hint of perfume Holmes had noted upon the letter. A single cigarette of the thin Turkish sort smouldered in a tray beside the couch where she reclined. Holmes bowed with that mixture of courtesy and irony which never failed to disconcert those unused to it. "Lady Eugenia," he said, "we crave a few minutes concerning the melancholy event at Sir Alistair Penruddock's." The faintest flicker passed over her lips, less surprise than calculation. "I expected you, Mr. Holmes. One hears that you appear where riddles lie, and Sir Alistair's death has already become a riddle, has it not?" Holmes smiled slightly. "You admit, then, that it was not natural?" "I admit only that it was tragic." She motioned us to sit, and the play of lamplight upon the silver fittings of the room lent her face an almost statuesque stillness. Holmes examined the cigarette, turning it delicately between long fingers. "The same brand, smoked by Sir Alistair's unknown visitor. You have excellent taste. Might I ask when you last saw him alive?" Her eyes lifted to his. "Last evening. He begged me to call after dinner on a matter he termed of conscience. I went discreetly, since London breeds gossip faster than roses, but when I reached the house the lights were low. He met me in the conservatory. He seemed troubled, agitated even. He spoke of certain papers that might ruin a reputation, not his own, he said, and asked if I could persuade Mr. Percival Dane to relinquish them. Then, quite suddenly, he grew faint. I left him seated there, insisting that rest would restore him." Holmes's gaze did not waver. "At what hour?" close upon midnight. And you departed how? By the garden door. Sir Alistair himself unbolted it. Holmes's voice remained soft. Then he rebolted it, I presume, after your departure? She hesitated a fraction too long. I suppose so. I heard the bolt slide as I passed through the gate. The admission hung in the air, delicate as perfume and twice as dangerous.
May I trouble you with one more question? Holmes said. You wrote to him yesterday? I did not. Nor to me. Her brows arched faintly. To you, Mr. Holmes? I have never had the honour. He inclined his head. Then the handwriting upon a certain message must belong to another hand that likewise prefers violet scent and Turkish tobacco. Forgive my intrusion. She smiled with poised indifference, but I could see a tremor beneath the glove she adjusted upon her wrist. As we took our leave, Holmes paused upon the threshold. Should memory visit you with any small detail, a word, a gesture, I should be grateful for a note. You may send it sealed to Baker Street. When the door closed, he laughed soundlessly. She is lying, Watson, not about the meeting, that much is true, but about what followed. She never left him alive. We hailed a cab back toward Belgrave Square, the fog curling like grey smoke about the wheels. Holmes's face, half lit by the street lamps, was all intellect now. The key point, my dear fellow, is the bolt. It could not have been shot from outside, yet Lady Eugenia heard it. Therefore she herself must have drawn it before leaving, or believed she did. What if another hand slid it home after her? A servant, perhaps, or someone concealed. I ventured. You think she had an accomplice? Or an observer? The missing bust, remember? A small object easily moved, yet heavy enough to conceal within it a document or a vial. It vanished the same night. That, Watson, may be the true motive. He leaned forward suddenly and tapped upon the roof. To the Darnley Club. I must speak with Mr. Percival Dane before Lestrade dulls him with official interrogation. The club's porter, a wizened veteran in braid, admitted us to a smoking room where Dane sat reading the morning papers. He was a clean-shaven man of middle years, elegant and self-possessed, with the cold courtesy of the courtroom. When Holmes introduced himself, the barrister laid down his paper with an ironic smile. So the great detective has taken our little tragedy in hand. May I hope you will soon discover that my friend died as honourably as he lived? Holmes accepted the taunt without reply. You knew him well, Mr. Dane. For 20 years he was a man of rigid virtue, too rigid, some would say. Holmes's tone sharpened. Did his virtue extend to keeping secrets? The barrister's eyes narrowed. That depends upon whose secrets you mean. Perhaps those involving a lady's reputation. A flicker of colour touched Dane's cheek. You are alluding to Lady Eugenia Vale. I shall save you the trouble of insinuation, Mr. Holmes. Sir Alistair once engaged in certain speculations with her late husband. After the man's death, papers remained that might, if misinterpreted, suggest impropriety. I, as her legal adviser, held them. Sir Alistair urged me yesterday to destroy them. I refused until I had Lady Eugenia's consent. And that consent, did you seek it last night? I did not. I was here until 1 o'clock. You may ask the steward. Holmes regarded him thoughtfully. 1 o'clock leaves an hour unaccounted before dawn and a key unreturned. I thank you, Mr. Dane. You have clarified more than you suppose. Outside, the fog had thickened again, wrapping the gaslights in halos. Holmes walked in silence until we reached the carriage. Watson, we have 3 elements now in concert. A lady who lies, a lawyer who protects, and a dead man who smiled. Between them runs a thread of blackmail, or its shadow. Sir Alistair confronted guilt, not his own, and died smiling because he believed he had righted a wrong. Yet someone ensured his silence would be permanent.
Tonight, we return to Belgrave Square. There is something behind that conservatory glass, which daylight has not revealed. When night fell, we stood once more before the shuttered house. Holmes produced from his pocket a thin length of steel and worked the latch with practiced ease. The air inside was heavy with damp vegetation. He moved by memory to the wicker chair, then knelt beside it. The wax on the window latch, Watson, the murderer's assurance of a noiseless exit. But there is more. He lifted a fern pot from the sill, revealing a sliver of marble broken cleanly across. "The bust of Minerva," he whispered. "See how it fractured. Something hidden within caused the split. Let us examine." From the hollow base he drew a folded sheet of paper, stiff and yellowed, sealed with crimson wax. By the dim light of his lantern we read the heading, "Confession of Alistair Penruddock." Beneath, in a trembling hand, were the words, "If harm comes to me, look to those who feared exposure more than I feared death." Holmes replaced it carefully. Now we know why he smiled. He died believing truth would outlive him. But truth, Watson, is a shy bird. Someone tried very hard to clip its wings. He straightened, eyes gleaming. "Tomorrow we show this to Lestrade, and then we shall see whose composure breaks first." The following morning broke bleak and colourless, the fog lying thick upon Baker Street as though London itself wished to conceal its secrets. Holmes had been awake for hours, his violin silent, his breakfast untouched, and his eyes fixed on the folded confession that lay upon the table. I had learned to respect that particular stillness. It was the silence of a mind sharpening its blade before the cut. At last he spoke, his voice low, but edged with decision. "Watson, we are dealing with a crime conceived by intellect rather than passion. The confession is authentic. Note the phrasing, the precise hand, the moral gravity. Sir Alistair wrote it under no duress. Yet he hid it in the marble bust, and that, my dear fellow, tells us he feared discovery before death." He rose abruptly and began to pace. "The question is, whom did he
Fear? And why conceal a document he plainly wished to be found? That paradox, Watson, is the key to everything." Before I could answer, a sharp rap came at the door. Lestrade entered, his coat glistening with moisture, and his expression more sardonic than usual. "You'll forgive me, Mr. Holmes, but the Yard dislikes being kept in the dark. I've just come from the mortuary. The post-mortem confirms your suspicion. Chloral hydrate mixed with alcohol. Enough to kill a man in his sleep." Holmes nodded. "Administered how?" "Through the decanter. The residue matches the draught found in his glass." "And your conclusion?" Lestrade allowed himself a thin smile. "Accidental overdose. He was in the habit of taking a sleeping cordial. Perhaps he poured too heavy a hand. Case closed." Holmes's eyes gleamed with amusement. "You interest me exceedingly, Lestrade. Tell me, did your chemist notice the faint almond trace?" "He did, but that's only the ether, natural with chloral." "Indeed, and did he find traces of prussic acid?" The inspector blinked. "Good heavens, no." "Then your chemist must change his spectacles. The acid is minute, yet sufficient to distort the features into that peculiar smile." Lestrade's smugness faltered. "Are you saying murder?" "I am saying," Holmes replied evenly, "that your accidental overdose was carefully designed to appear as such." Lestrade muttered something about clever tricks and evidence that won't stand up, but Holmes cut him short. "Evidence will stand when the truth supports it. You have in custody the decanter, yes? Guard it as you would the crown jewels. And do me the favour of keeping this matter from the press until evening. I would not have our quarry spooked." The inspector hesitated, then nodded grudgingly and departed.
Holmes turned to me, eyes alight with that strange inward fire that made him both formidable and faintly inhuman. "Watson, the confession speaks of those who feared exposure more than I feared death. He refers to plural individuals. Therefore, both Lady Eugenia and Dane are implicated, though perhaps not equally. The lady lies out of fear, the lawyer lies out of protection. One of them poured the cordial." He snatched up his coat. "Come, Watson, there is more to learn at the club." The Darnley Club was unusually hushed when we arrived, its members huddled in low conversation. The death of Sir Alister had clearly unsettled even this stoic circle of privilege. Holmes went straight to the steward. "You were on duty the night before last?" The man inclined his head. "Yes, sir." "Did Mr. Percival Dane leave alone?" "He did, sir, a little after 1. He appeared perturbed." "And Lady Eugenia Vale?" "She called earlier in the evening, around 9:30, to leave a note for Mr. Dane. Said it was of personal importance. I placed it in his pigeonhole." Holmes's tone sharpened. "And did he receive it?" "He took it out upon his arrival at 10, seemed surprised, even agitated." Holmes exchanged a brief glance with me. "You have rendered us great service," he said, and we departed. As we drove away through the murky streets, I ventured, "So she wrote to Dane after all. Yet she denied sending any letters." "Quite," said Holmes, "and the note was delivered before she met Sir Alister, which places her at the centre of both correspondences, the one to the barrister, and the one sent anonymously to me. She plays a dangerous game, Watson, but not for herself. I suspect she is shielding someone. The smile, the confession, the missing bust, all point to an unseen third figure." "You mean someone beyond the lady and the lawyer?" "Precisely. A shadow in their circle, one who knew Sir Alister's conscience would compel him to act, and who took steps to silence him before dawn." We reached Baker Street to find a messenger waiting. The boy handed Holmes a small envelope and vanished into the fog. It was sealed with the same violet-scented gum as before. Holmes opened it carefully. Inside was a single line in the same slanted hand. He smiles still. "You will not." For a moment even Holmes's composure wavered. "So," he murmured, "our opponent has a taste for theatrics. And confidence, too, a dangerous combination." He tossed the note into the fire. The writing matches the first message, but this one was penned by a different hand, similar but less firm. The mimicry is deliberate. Whoever wrote it wishes us to believe it came from the same author. It is a warning, and a clumsy one. A knock at the door interrupted us again. Mrs. Hudson announced Mr. Ashcroft, pale and anxious. "Mr. Holmes," he said breathlessly, "you must come at once. Lady Eugenia, she has been arrested." "Arrested? On what grounds?" "Lestrade himself took her. He says poison was found among her belongings, a vial labelled chloral hydrate. She protested her innocence, but they would not listen." Holmes's expression hardened. "Fools," he muttered. "The true poisoner would never keep the means at hand. This arrest will only serve the murderer's purpose." He seized his hat. "Watson, we must reach the yard before the charge is formalized. If Lestrade commits her, the real villain will vanish by nightfall." At Scotland Yard, Holmes confronted the inspector with icy precision. "You have overreached, Lestrade. That vial proves nothing. It confirms only that Lady Eugenia possessed the same sedative prescribed to half the households in Mayfair. You have arrested the wrong person." Lestrade bristled. "Then who did it, Mr. Holmes? The butler? The lawyer?" Holmes's eyes glittered. "Not the butler, who is too simple, nor the lawyer, who is too proud. No, the killer is one who moved between both households, unseen, who carried messages, mixed drafts, and smoothed every difficulty. He turned abruptly toward Ashcroft. The young secretary started, his face draining of colour. You can't mean me." Holmes's voice was quiet but merciless. "You, Lionel Ashcroft, are the one person who had access to Sir Alistair's library, Lady Eugenia's letters, and the club post. You alone could place the poison where it would be taken unsuspectingly. You wrote to me to divert suspicion, thinking your clever little game would never be traced." Ashcroft stammered. "You have no proof?" "None." Holmes drew from his pocket the folded confession and laid it on the desk. "No proof? Sir Alistair's final words condemn not the lady nor the lawyer, but those who feared exposure. He learned of your thefts from the club accounts, the very funds you managed for him. He confronted you and you silenced him with his own cordial. The smile upon his face, Mr. Ashcroft, was not amusement, but pity, for he knew your crime would find you out." For a long moment no one spoke. Then the secretary's trembling hands rose to his face. "He said he would forgive me," he whispered. "He said he'd keep my name clear if I confessed. But I couldn't. I couldn't let it ruin me." His shoulders sagged. "I only meant to make him sleep." Holmes exhaled slowly. "You made him sleep forever." Lestrade signalled the constables, who moved forward. As they led Ashcroft away, Holmes turned to me, the weariness of victory already dulling his voice. "It was inevitable, Watson. The man who smiled after death smiled because he forgave his murderer." He looked toward the grey window where daylight seeped through like ash. "And forgiveness, my dear friend, is the one thing even death cannot conceal." The confession torn from Lionel Ashcroft in that grey interrogation room might have satisfied the law, but it did not satisfy Sherlock Holmes. Even as the secretary's voice cracked beneath the weight of guilt and the clatter of Lestrade's pen filled the silence, I saw in Holmes's expression that restless disquiet which meant the case was, to his mind, incomplete. When at last Ashcroft was led away between two constables, Holmes neither exulted nor spoke. He merely stood by the window, staring into the drizzle-streaked street as though listening for a sound beyond our hearing. Only when the door closed did he stir. "There is mercy in justice tonight," he said quietly. "But justice itself, Watson, that remains to be seen." We rode home through a sullen fog that blurred the gaslights into halos. Holmes sat motionless, fingers pressed together, his eyes fixed on the dark pane. At last I ventured, "Surely, Holmes, the case is resolved. Ashcroft confessed freely, his motive, his opportunity, his access, everything fits." He did not answer at once. "Fits?" he repeated at length, as if tasting the word. "It fits, yes, but too neatly, like a play written to please its audience. Ashcroft's story has the symmetry of convenience. He claims remorse, yet premeditated the deception of that letter to me. He insists he meant only to induce sleep, yet used a compound that no layman could mix without medical knowledge, and he implicates no one else. That, Watson, is the neatest part of all." I protested that the evidence was overwhelming, but Holmes's smile was thin. "So it is. Overwhelming evidence is the most dangerous kind. It overwhelms reason. Tell me, my dear fellow, does remorse drive a man to warn the very detective who might catch him? Does fear inspire one to compose poetic messages scented with violets? No, Watson. Those letters were written by another hand entirely, one who wished to frame the secretary or guide us toward him. Both explanations are equally chilling." I said nothing. His reasoning, as ever, left little ground to stand upon. When we reached Baker Street, he went straight to his desk and spread out the fragments of our investigation, the photograph, the confession, the anonymous notes, and Sir Alistair's own dying statement. The fire threw long shadows across the table. "Observe," he said, how every thread leads to the same web, communication. Notes, letters, messages, all carried or conveyed through Ashcroft's hands. The fatal cordial itself was fetched from the apothecary by his errand boy. Yet if someone wished to commit the perfect murder, what better accomplice than a man already guilty of another sin? Ashcroft's embezzlement made him an ideal scapegoat. Someone used his fear to mask their own intent. I asked who that someone might be. Holmes's eyes glittered. Who benefited most from Sir Alistair's silence? Not the penniless secretary, but the lady and the lawyer who stood to lose reputation and fortune alike. One of them played the subtler game. Before dawn, we were again at Scotland Yard. Lestrade, bleary-eyed and irritable, received us with scant civility. "I suppose you've come to tell me my prisoner's innocent?" he muttered. "Well, it's no use. The Crown will hang him." "Possibly," said Holmes, "but the rope may yet be meant for another neck." He produced the second violet-scented letter, now carefully mounted between glass. "This ink differs from that used in the first note. The pen, too, is finer, the downstrokes lighter. You see, Lestrade, the first was written by a man, the second by a woman imitating his hand. I have confirmed it with microscopic examination. The perfume seals the deception. Only one of our suspects bathes her correspondence in violets." Lestrade groaned. "You're not dragging Lady Eugenia back into this, Holmes. We've released her." "Exactly," said Holmes. "And that, my dear Inspector, is precisely why she will run." His words proved prophetic. Before midday, a constable arrived, breathless with news. Lady Eugenia had vanished. Her maid reported she left before breakfast, claiming an urgent journey to the coast. Holmes's composure did not falter. "The coast indeed," he murmured. "She will seek refuge at Dover, perhaps Calais, but not before securing her companion's loyalty. Come, Watson, we must intercept a letter before it crosses the Channel." Within an hour, we were at the General Post Office, where Holmes's influence secured us access to the outgoing mail-bags bound for the Continent. He examined them swiftly, and with a cry of triumph drew out one envelope addressed to Mr. Percival Dane, Barrister, Darnley Club, London. It was sealed with violet wax. Back in the cab, he broke it open with forensic care. Inside was a folded sheet bearing the same delicate scent. The message was short. "It is done. Burn all that binds us. I cannot endure the weight of his smile." Holmes read it twice, then passed it to me. "The lady writes as one haunted by conscience, not guilt. Burn all that binds us." She refers to documents, no doubt, the same incriminating papers Sir Alistair wished destroyed. She believes the crime avenges them, therefore she did not act alone. Dane held the motive, she the courage, and Ashcroft the means. But who performed the act? That, Watson, remains uncertain. We returned to Dane's chambers at once. The barrister received us with icy civility, but when Holmes laid the letter before him, his composure wavered. "This," he stammered, "is not my doing. She acts in frenzy." Holmes's gaze was merciless. "And yet it was your knowledge of chemistry that taught her how to mix the cordial safely, or so you thought. You, sir, were the intellect behind her hand." Dane's jaw tightened. "You have no proof." "On the contrary," Holmes replied, "I have the testimony of a chemist in Vigo Street who sold to a lady answering her description a phial of prussic acid under prescription written in your name. She believed it harmless in small quantity, but you knew better. You sent her to fetch it, confident that Ashcroft's handling of the cordial would obscure the trail." The barrister's mask cracked. "You cannot understand," he said hoarsely. "Alistair meant to publish those letters, to destroy her, and with her my career. He swore to expose us both. I sought only to frighten him, to make him ill for a day, to delay him, but the dose—" He stopped, his face ashen.
She believed he forgave us. That is why she smiled at him when she saw the body. She thought it mercy. Holmes regarded him with a cold, weary pity. And he did forgive her, Mr. Dane. That is the tragedy you failed to foresee. Lestrade arrived moments later to complete the arrest. As Dane was led away, Holmes turned toward the window, watching the rain trace silver threads down the glass. "You see, Watson," he said softly, "the smile of Sir Alistair Penruddock was no riddle of science, but of the soul. He smiled because he pitied those who wronged him, and because he knew that truth, sooner or later, would find its own voice. Even now it speaks." He drew from his pocket the last violet-scented scrap and dropped it into the fire. As it curled to ash, the faint perfume filled the room. "There is your justice," he murmured, "sweet to the senses, poisonous to the heart." And with that, he turned to his violin, letting a low, haunting note rise into the dim London morning, while outside the fog closed in once more, silent as the grave that had inspired it all. For several days after the arrest of Percival Dane, London spoke of nothing else. The newspapers hailed Holmes's deductions as miraculous, while the public, ever hungry for sensation, devoured the tale of a smiling corpse, a guilty lady, and a barrister brought low by love and pride. Yet Holmes himself took no satisfaction in it. Indeed, during that grey week I saw upon his face a gravity deeper than mere fatigue. He seemed less the triumphant reasoner than the melancholy philosopher, haunted by the very symmetry of his own success. He spoke little, played long hours upon the violin, and spent the remainder pacing the sitting-room like a restless spirit, tethered to thought. It was on the fourth evening, as the lamps were being lit, that he suddenly ceased his pacing and said, "Watson, have you considered how little we know of the moment itself, the precise instant of Sir Alistair's death?" I looked up from my writing. "Surely enough, Holmes. The poison was taken, the door bolted, the chair found. What more can there be to learn?" "Everything," he replied. "A puzzle may be solved and yet remain misunderstood. I am troubled by a contradiction that no confession has yet resolved. Dane claims he intended only to delay Sir Alistair's actions, not to kill him. Lady Eugenia asserts that she merely obeyed his instruction in ignorance of the poison's potency. Yet both swear they parted from him before midnight. The coroner's estimate places death at that very hour. Who then rebolted the door? And why was the bust, the hiding place of the confession, removed before the police arrived? The true criminal act may not be the murder itself, Watson, but what followed it. His words stirred that old thrill which years of companionship had not dulled. "You mean someone returned after death had taken him?" "Perhaps," said Holmes, his eyes dark with thought. "Perhaps to conceal, perhaps to recover, perhaps even to communicate. Sir Alistair's smile, the letters, the missing bust, all speak of purpose beyond the grave. If my theory is correct, there remains one unseen figure whose shadow fell across that conservatory, unnoticed by the law and unimagined by us." I could not repress a shiver. "But who, Holmes?" He took from his desk a slip of paper and spread it before me. It bore a single line in delicate script, one of the anonymous messages sent before Ashcroft's arrest. "You will recall this," he said. "The hand that wrote it was neither Lady Eugenia's nor Dane's. I compared it again today. The ink is peculiar, a mixture of iron gall with a trace of indigo. It is not sold commonly in London. Only one establishment imports it, the stationer of the Darnley Club." "Then the writer was a member?" "Precisely, or someone who had access to the club's correspondence. I called there this afternoon. The steward confirmed that Sir Alistair's private secretary, young Ashcroft, had a colleague who sometimes shared his clerical duties, a cousin by marriage named Harold Kent,
Dismissed several months ago for gambling debts, the man vanished afterward. I believe, Watson, that he did not vanish far. That night, we dined hastily and set out once more for Belgrave Square. The house stood shuttered now, its master buried, its servants dismissed. Holmes had obtained permission from Lestrade to examine it once more, under pretext of securing the remaining papers. The moon, a cold half-disk, hung above the chimneys as we entered by the same garden door through which Lady Eugenia had passed on that fatal night. Within, the air was heavy with the scent of withered plants. Holmes's lantern beam slid over the tiled floor until it came to rest upon the wicker chair. The ghost of the smile still lingered there, etched in my imagination more deeply than on the dead man's face. Holmes knelt beside the chair again. "Observe, Watson, the tiles around the base. Do you recall how smooth they seemed before?" "Yes, the place was spotless." "Too spotless. Look here." He directed the light to a small crevice where the tiles met the skirting. Within it glimmered something metallic. With his forceps he drew it out, a narrow key, tarnished but unmistakably old. "This is no household key," he said. "Note the worn wards, it belongs to a safe." But the police searched the house entirely. Not entirely, they searched for evidence of guilt, not of motive. He moved quickly to the adjoining library. "There is a cabinet here that caught my attention before. A writing desk with an inner compartment. Help me with this lamp." I held the light while he manipulated the lock. Presently the panel yielded with a sharp click. Inside lay a small iron safe built into the woodwork. The key fitted perfectly. When he turned it, the door swung open, revealing a single sealed envelope bearing the crest of the Darnley Club. Holmes broke the seal. Within were several documents bound with ribbon, a series of letters and receipts, and a smaller envelope addressed to Sherlock Holmes, Baker Street. He opened it slowly and read aloud. "If this reaches you, it will mean that truth has outlived me. There is one among my associates who trades in secrets as others trade in gold. His ruin is written in these papers, but so too is my own folly, for I trusted him as a brother. I leave you, Mr. Holmes, to judge between us. Tell Lady Eugenia that I forgive her, but not the hand that smiled beside her in the dark." For a long moment we stood silent. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock upon the mantel. "Then he knew," I murmured. "He knew of Dane, of Lady Eugenia, and of this other, Kent." Holmes's face was grim. "He knew, and he arranged even his death to expose them. But Kent discovered his intention, returned after the act, and removed the bust that held the confession. He meant to destroy it, but lost his nerve, and hid, instead, what he believed the true evidence, these papers, in the safe. The letter addressed to me he dared not burn, perhaps thinking to use it later for blackmail." He replaced the bundle reverently. "There is your missing hand, Watson. Ashcroft poisoned the cordial. Dane guided it. Lady Eugenia fled from it, but Kent profited by it. The smile was not for them, it was for him. The dead man knew that greed will always betray itself." We left the house in silence. The fog had thinned, revealing the first pale wash of dawn above the roofs. Holmes drew his coat close and spoke with that quiet finality I had learned to respect. "When the law has finished with Dane, I shall give Lestrade these papers. Kent will surface soon enough. Such men always do, but mark me, Watson, the truest smile of all is not that of the dead, but of the living who understand what death has spared them." And as we walked home through the waking streets, I saw in the grey light the faintest curve upon Holmes's lips, not of triumph, but of comprehension, as if he too had glimpsed, for one brief instant, the reason why a man might smile after death. It was the following evening when the final act of that strange affair began to unfold. Holmes had spent most of the day in his chair by the fire, the unopened bundle of Sir Alister's papers resting upon his knee. He had smoked incessantly, his gaze fixed upon the coals with that distant, meditative stillness which signalled his mind's deep engagement. At length he rose, struck his pipe against the hearth, and said in a tone that brooked no argument, "Watson, the play is nearly over. All that remains is to let the last actor make his entrance." I looked up from the evening paper, puzzled. "You mean Harold Kent?" "Precisely. The man is desperate, Watson, and desperation is the most predictable of all motives. He believes the paper's destroyed, yet he knows that I exist, and that is enough to drive him to act. He will come tonight. The scent of peril draws its own hound, and I have left the trail precisely as he would wish." He crossed to the table, where the safe key and a decoy packet of papers lay conspicuously displayed beneath the lamplight. "A stage must be set," he murmured. "The audience of one will arrive when darkness grows thick enough to conceal him." "You mean to face him here, in Baker Street?" "Where better? Here I can choose the light, the distance, the witness. You, my dear fellow, and perhaps Lestrade if he arrives in time. I have already sent a note to Scotland Yard requesting a discreet watch upon the door." The remainder of the evening passed with an oppressive quiet. Outside, the fog gathered anew, rolling in heavy folds against the windows. At 10 o'clock Mrs. Hudson brought our supper, but Holmes scarcely touched his plate. He sat instead in that uncanny stillness of his, the very embodiment of listening. Only once did he move, to turn down the wick of the lamp until the room lay in half shadow, the table and the packet alone illuminated. The fire crackled softly. The rest was silence. It was near midnight when the faintest sound stirred in the passage below. A cautious tread upon the stair, a brief pause, then the slow creak of the landing board outside our door. Holmes's eyes met mine, and in that instant I saw the electric alertness spring to life within him. "Be seated," he whispered. "We must seem unaware." The door opened a fraction. A narrow shaft of fog crept in, and with it a man's silhouette, stooping slightly, one hand clutching the doorframe. I recognized him at once, the sallow face, the restless eyes, the nervous predatory manner. It was indeed Harold Kent. He slipped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Holmes did not stir. "You have chosen a strange hour for a visit," he said in that cold, level voice which could freeze the blood. "The fog is thick tonight, Mr. Kent. Thieves might lose their way." Kent started violently, his gaze darting to the table. I thought you'd be asleep," he stammered. "I only came to recover what was never yours." Holmes finished. "You see before you the one thing Sir Alister valued more than his life, his honour. You betrayed it for a handful of debts and the smile of a lady you thought compromised. You have come to steal what you already sold." Kent's hand trembled toward his pocket. "I don't know what you mean." Holmes rose then, moving with the swiftness of a striking hawk. "On the contrary, you know precisely. The ink, the handwriting of those letters, the perfumed gum on the envelopes, they were your tools, not Ashcroft's. You forged the correspondence between Lady Eugenia and Dane, then sold copies to those who would pay for scandal. When Sir Alister discovered you, you used Ashcroft's fear as cover and let him deliver the poison you procured." The man's composure crumbled. "It wasn't meant to kill him," he gasped. "He said he'd ruin me. He said he'd have me arrested. I only wanted him quiet for a night, to give me time." Holmes's voice cut through his plea. "So you followed Lady Eugenia's visit, crept in through the garden and watched from behind the palms. When he fell asleep, you unbolted the door, added the fatal dose, and left him smiling. Your masterpiece of irony. Then when you heard that the confession existed, you returned to the house and took the bust, hoping to find it. You failed because he had hidden it elsewhere. Kent sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "You cannot prove it," he muttered. "You have no witness." Holmes stepped aside. "You're wrong. You have two." The door opened once more, and Lestrade entered with two constables, their boots echoing on the boards. "We've heard enough, Mr. Holmes," the inspector said grimly. "He was under watch since afternoon. Your letter came in time." Kent looked up wildly, his face white as the fog beyond the glass. "He forgave me," he cried suddenly. "Before I left him that night, he woke for a moment. He looked straight at me. He smiled. I thought he meant to pardon me, but his eyes were like light through smoke." Holmes regarded him with strange solemnity. He smiled because he knew Kent. He understood that guilt is its own executioner. You mistook mercy for deliverance, but it was judgment you saw. Lestrade motioned his men forward. As they led the prisoner away, the wind rattled the window pane, and the sound of retreating footsteps faded down the stairs. For some time, neither Holmes nor I spoke. At last, he crossed to the table and gathered the remaining papers, tying them neatly with string. "Will you give them to the police?" I asked. "In the morning," he said. "Their contents belong to the dead no longer. What matters now is the lesson they contain, that truth, however buried, has a way of smiling back at deceit." He drew the curtain aside, gazing out into the rolling fog where the street lamps burned like watchful eyes. "There are few mysteries in life, Watson," he murmured. "Only human hearts too proud to see their own reflection. Sir Alistair saw his, and it brought him peace. The others saw only shadows, and those, in the end, destroyed them." He let the curtain fall, then turned toward his violin. The first note rose soft and mournful, a fragile thread of sound that drifted through the room and vanished into the fog beyond the glass. And as I listened, I could not help but feel that somewhere, in the quiet depths of the night, the man who had smiled after death at last rested with the serenity that had eluded the living. The next morning found Baker Street bathed in a cold, wan light that seemed to leach all warmth from the city. Holmes had not slept. I discovered him seated precisely where I had left him, a half-burnt candle guttering at his side, his violin untouched upon the table. The fatigue around his eyes was deep, yet there was a new clarity in his expression, the quiet tension of a man who has seen the full pattern emerge from chaos. He looked up as I entered. "Kent will not reach the gallows," he said almost absently. "The law may claim him, but justice has already passed sentence. He will take his own life before the week ends." I stared at him in disbelief. "Holmes, surely you exaggerate. The man is a coward." "Cowards, my dear Watson," he replied, "fear disgrace more than death. The latter they can at least control." He rose, stretched, and walked to the window where the fog drifted low over Baker Street. "I have been considering Sir Alistair's final hour. That smile, Watson, it was not merely forgiveness, as we once supposed, it was triumph. He knew that his murderer would not escape, that every piece of deceit would ultimately collapse upon itself. He planned it all with the precision of a chess player sacrificing his own king to expose the opponent's game. I could not help marveling at the grim poetry of it. "You mean he foresaw even Kent's downfall?" Holmes nodded slowly. "And ours, if we had failed to see it. That confession hidden in the bust was not only for me, it was a test, a trap for the mind as much as for the criminal." I see it now. He meant to ensure that truth would reach the surface no matter who tried to bury it. There is a certain grandeur in such foresight, don't you think? Before I could answer, the door opened abruptly and Lestrade entered, looking far more dishevelled than usual. "You were right again, Mr. Holmes," he said grimly. "They found Kent dead in his cell this morning. Took poison, smuggled in somehow, a note beside him." Holmes accepted the paper in silence. I read over his shoulder. He smiled because he knew I would follow. For a moment, the only sound was the hiss of the fire. Holmes folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. "As I said, Watson, he feared disgrace more than the rope. Another circle closes." Lestrade rubbed his forehead. "There'll be an inquest, of course, but it's over now. The Yard owes you a debt, Mr. Holmes. You've unravelled a web none of us could see through." Holmes gave a weary smile. "The web, yes, but not the spider's mind. That remains a mystery no man can untangle." He paused. "Still, I am glad you came, Inspector. There is one service I would ask. Sir Alistair's personal papers, those concerning Lady Eugenia, should be destroyed. They are of no use to the law, and of too much value to scandal." Lestrade hesitated, then nodded. "I'll see to it." With a final glance between us, he departed, leaving the faint scent of rain and tobacco lingering in the room. Holmes sank into his chair and lit his pipe. "You see, Watson," he said, "we have reached the quiet after the storm. Yet I cannot shake a certain melancholy. The human heart, when it errs, creates tragedies no law can amend. Here were three people, each ensnared by fear of shame, of love, of exposure. Sir Alistair alone met it with courage, and his peace was the price of their ruin." He fell silent, and for a time we listened to the ticking of the clock. Outside, a milk cart rattled along the street, the mundane sound a jarring reminder that life went on, indifferent to crime or sorrow. "Holmes," I said at last, "you have often said that crime is a symptom of civilization's unrest. Does this case not prove the opposite, that conscience, even in the face of corruption, may still assert itself?" Holmes regarded me with that rare gentleness I had seen only a handful of times. "Perhaps, my dear friend, perhaps that is why this case troubles me most. Logic cannot account for mercy. It is a quality beyond deduction, yet it alters every outcome. Sir Alistair forgave his murderer, and by doing so condemned him more surely than any court could have done. What does reason make of that?" I could find no answer, and he did not expect one. He leaned back, the smoke curling around him like the last trace of the fog. "I sometimes think," he murmured, "that the greatest mysteries are not of crime but of conscience." Days passed, and the city's gossip turned elsewhere. Lady Eugenia withdrew from society, retiring to her country estate, where rumour said she lived in seclusion, visited only by her pastor. Holmes received a short letter from her, expressing gratitude for his discretion, and enclosing a pressed violet, faintly scented as though memory itself had a fragrance. He placed it quietly between the pages of his case notes and never mentioned her again. One evening, about a fortnight later, I returned to Baker Street to find him seated before the fire, his violin resting across his knees. Without greeting, he said, "I have been thinking of Sir Alistair again. There is something sublime in a man who can face death smiling. To him, truth was not a weapon, but a kind of release." He raised the bow and drew from the strings a single, lingering note, low, mournful, and yet not without hope. It seemed to fill the room with the echo of all that had passed, the fog-shrouded garden, the faint scent of violets, the image of a man seated in his chair, smiling as if at some private revelation beyond mortal understanding. When the final vibration died away, Holmes set the violin aside and looked at me with the faintest flicker of a smile. You see, Watson, even death may yield its secret to reason, but it is the smile that defies explanation, and that, perhaps, is why it lingers longest. I wrote those words later that night, listening to the city's quiet breathing beyond the window, and though many years have since passed, I have never forgotten the strange serenity of that smile, nor the man who, through it, taught both his murderer and his friends that truth, once seen, can never truly die. A week later found the rhythms of Baker Street restored, or nearly so. Yet beneath Holmes's apparent calm, I sensed that subtle vibration which always preceded the unexpected. He had not taken another case, though several telegrams lay unanswered upon his desk, nor had he visited the yard despite Lestrade's invitation to dine. He spent his hours poring over the last of Sir Alister's notes, his violin silent in the corner, his gaze wandering now and then toward the fog that pressed against the windows as though London itself still whispered secrets from beyond the grave. On the 8th morning, while I was reading at the table, he suddenly said, without looking up, "Watson, do you believe a man's influence may extend beyond his death, an unfinished design that continues to act, like a mechanism left winding itself out?" I looked up, startled. "You speak of Sir Alister?" "Of course. I have been re-examining his papers, and something refuses to fit." He pushed a folded letter toward me. "This, my dear fellow, was among the lesser correspondence, apparently of no consequence. It bears the date of the day before his death and is addressed not to any associate or family member, but to a certain Colonel Berkeley of the Indian Service, retired and residing in Sussex. He writes, 'The matter of the emerald is settled. It will pass into safer hands before the week ends. Say nothing until you hear from me again.' There is no further mention of it anywhere. The word emerald appears in no inventory of his estate, and Lestrade, though thorough in his dull way, overlooked it entirely." I turned the paper over. An emerald, perhaps a jewel, perhaps a code name for the documents. "Precisely my difficulty," Holmes murmured. "If literal, then a valuable stone vanished with the man's death. If figurative, it represents something far more elusive. Either way, it suggests that Sir Alister had another purpose in motion even as the storm gathered round him. And consider, no such item was found among his effects. Suppose it was taken before the murder or after?" "After? You think Kent or Dane?" "Neither. Both were too consumed by panic to notice what did not concern their immediate survival. I suspect a third hand again, one unknown even to them. The ripples of this affair, Watson, have not yet reached their shore." He rose abruptly, pacing with that restless energy I had come to recognize as the herald of pursuit. "Fetch your coat. We are going to Belgrave Square once more." When we arrived, the house was no longer deserted. A woman in mourning stood upon the steps, giving instructions to a tradesman. She turned at our approach, a figure tall, veiled, but unmistakably Lady Eugenia Vale. Her gloved hand trembled as she recognized us. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "I thought I should not see you again." Holmes inclined his head, and yet fate seems to conspire otherwise. "May we enter for a moment? There is a matter left unresolved which may concern you more than you know." Inside, the rooms smelled of dust and abandonment, but Lady Eugenia moved through them like a ghost revisiting her own sin. In the library, where the fire had long gone out, Holmes examined the shelves until his fingers paused upon a narrow space behind a row of parliamentary reports. With a swift motion, he drew out a small ebony box. It was locked, but a few seconds of manipulation with his penknife opened it. Inside lay a green velvet pouch. "An emerald indeed," Holmes said quietly. He poured the contents into his palm, a single stone of remarkable size, deep green and shot through with veins of gold. Even through the dim light, it gleamed like a captured flame. Lady Eugenia gasped. "I have never seen that before." Holmes's eyes were fixed upon her. "No, but Sir Alistair meant that you should. This gem, Lady Eugenia, is the Penruddock emerald, brought from India by his grandfather, reputed to carry a curse upon those who possess it unjustly. It disappeared from the family vault years ago, after the mutiny, and was believed lost. Yet Sir Alistair recovered it. I believe he used it as a token, perhaps to test those nearest to him. You see the inscription here, carved so faintly one might miss it. Fidelitas in tenebris, faithfulness in the dark. Does that phrase mean anything to you?" Her eyes filled with sudden tears. Yes, it was our phrase, mine and his. Years ago, when his wife was alive, she discovered our correspondence and there was scandal. He broke it off, yet whenever we met by chance, he would say those words, meaning that loyalty could survive silence. Holmes nodded, his voice low. "Then this stone was meant for you." He wrote to Colonel Berkeley that it would pass into safer hands. By safer, he meant your own, knowing that after his death it might bring ruin if found here. Kent must have seen the box that night and taken the key, intending to sell it. But in his haste, he overlooked the hiding place. Fate, or justice, preserved it for its rightful owner. She looked at him through the veil of her grief. "And what am I to do with it now, Mr. Holmes? It has cost too much already." "Bury it," he said gently. "Let the earth reclaim what greed has profaned. The true value of such a gem lies in the lesson it teaches, not the fortune it commands." For a long moment she stood motionless, the emerald gleaming like a captive star in her gloved hand. Then she turned abruptly and placed it back into the box. "You are right. It shall end where it began." She looked up at Holmes with quiet resolve. "You have given me peace, Mr. Holmes. That is more than I deserve." Holmes bowed slightly. "Peace is seldom deserved, my lady. It is merely accepted when it comes." When she had gone, leaving the house empty once more, Holmes lingered at the doorway, gazing down the mist-laden street where her carriage vanished. "There, Watson," he said softly. "The final movement of our symphony. Every theme resolves, even those we thought discordant. Yet how curious that a man's last kindness should be hidden in a jewel and a smile." We walked back through the thickening dusk. "And the curse of the emerald?" I asked after a time. Holmes's eyes glinted in the gloom. "Every treasure carries its curse, my friend, the weight of what men are willing to sacrifice to possess it. In this case, the curse was mercy itself. Sir Alistair forgave too easily, and the world mistook his smile for weakness, but I think he understood more than any of them. He smiled not at death, but at deliverance. That night, when we reached Baker Street, he placed the emerald in the drawer of his desk until the following morning, when he arranged for its return to the Penruddock estate. I remember watching him seal the envelope and thinking that perhaps the true mystery of the case had never been about poison or greed or even justice. It was about the strange endurance of the human spirit, the way truth, like light through fog, finds its path however dim the hour. Holmes said nothing more that evening, yet as the fire burned low, I caught the faintest reflection of green upon his face, and for one fleeting instant it seemed that even he, cold, logical, unyielding Holmes, was touched by the ghost of that eternal smile. It was 2 mornings after the return of the emerald that the final twist revealed itself. a quiet, almost reluctant closing of the circle that had begun in fog and death. Holmes had dispatched the gem to the Penruddock estate by private courier, and having thus concluded what he called the moral epilogue, had resumed his accustomed indifference to worldly matters. Yet I could not help noticing that he remained unusually contemplative. He took long walks alone through Regent's Park, returning with the look of one who converses more with ghosts than men. On the second morning, as I poured his coffee, a letter arrived bearing the Penruddock seal. Holmes slit it open with his habitual precision, read a few lines, and then handed it silently to me. The letter was brief. "Sir, upon opening the parcel, we discovered not the emerald, but a perfect glass imitation of it. The original stone is gone. The courier swears he delivered it intact. Pray advise." I felt the blood chill in my veins. "Good heavens, Holmes, you sent it yourself, surely?" He raised a hand, eyes narrowing. "No, Watson, the courier is honest. I engaged him personally. The exchange must have occurred earlier. Someone, somewhere, substituted the copy. And since none but ourselves knew of its existence, the field of suspects is limited to the few who were present in Belgrave Square." "You think Lady Eugenia—" "Lady Eugenia had neither opportunity nor motive to deceive me. She would sooner have cast the jewel into the Thames than reclaim it by trickery. No, Watson, the deception occurred here, between the house and the courier's departure. And that, I regret to say, suggests one of two possibilities. Either Lestrade, who handled the package briefly during his visit yesterday, or someone who watched this house more closely than we supposed." He rose, fetched his magnifying lens, and examined the remnants of the wax seal still adhering to the ribbon that had bound the parcel. "Observe," he murmured, "the faint impression of a secondary crest beside the Penruddock seal, a small crescent, barely visible. That is not the mark of the courier's case, but of a duplicate signet. Our thief was not content with mere stealth. He wished to send a message." "What message?" "The crescent, my dear fellow, is the emblem of the Darnley Club." He smiled grimly. "The circle begins where it began. There is more corruption in that institution than Scotland Yard imagines. Sir Alistair's death silenced one scandal, but another breathes beneath it still." He was already donning his coat. "We must pay a final visit to St. James's. Bring your revolver, though I doubt you'll need it. There are moments when presence, not peril, decides the outcome." The Darnley Club appeared as tranquil as ever, its brass fittings polished, its servants discreet. Yet beneath the hush of newspapers and cigars there lingered an undercurrent of watchfulness. When Holmes requested to see the steward, a ripple passed among the members like wind through reeds. The man appeared promptly, bowing low. "Mr. Holmes, we did not expect—" "Indeed," Holmes interrupted. "Few expect truth when it knocks. I come concerning an emerald, one that passed through hands less scrupulous than your own. A word of honesty now may spare this house a scandal." The steward blanched. "Sir Alistair's stone? I know nothing." "Then perhaps the one who signs your pay ledger knows more. Call Mr. Dalton." The name produced an effect remarkable to witness. The steward faltered, stammered, and then disappeared through a side door. Holmes and I waited in silence until a tall, broad-shouldered man entered, a man I recognized at once from earlier investigations. He was no club servant, but an adventurer turned financier, once implicated in a smuggling affair at Marseille. Dalton's gaze met Holmes's with an uneasy bravado. "So," Holmes said quietly, "you prefer imitation to authenticity. How very modern of you." He drew from his pocket the duplicate wax seal. "You have an excellent engraver. The crescent mark betrayed you." Dalton's lips tightened. "If you know so much, what more do you want?" "The truth," Holmes said simply. "Sir Alistair trusted you once with his investments. You repaid him with ruin.
You used Kent to launder your debts, Dane to secure your contracts, and Lady Eugenia to mask your influence. When Sir Alistair discovered your theft, he wrote his confession and planned to expose you. His death saved your reputation, but not for long. The emerald, Dalton, was his insurance. He meant it to find its way to the crown should anything happen to him. You stole it then, and when I recovered it, you stole it again. Dalton laughed harshly. You have no proof. Holmes moved closer, voice lowering to an almost conversational tone. No proof, you say? Then why, Mr. Dalton, did you visit Belgrave Square 3 nights ago? Why did you bribe the caretaker for access? And why, when confronted by a constable, did you claim to be acting under my authority? The Yard keeps better notes than you imagine. The counterfeit gem you left in its place bears your fingerprint upon the inner facet. It was clumsy of you to handle it before the varnish dried. Dalton's colour drained. You cannot. I can and I will, Holmes said sharply. The law will attend to you soon enough, but there is one last service you may render, to tell me where the original now lies. The man's defiance broke. Gone, he said hoarsely. Sold to a collector in Antwerp. You'll never trace it. Holmes regarded him with a strange calm. You mistake me. I have no desire to recover it. Its value is less than the price you have already paid. At that moment, Lestrade entered with 2 constables, having been summoned by telegram earlier that morning. The arrest was swift and silent. As they led Dalton away, the murmur of the club resumed, polite and distant, as though decency could erase corruption by ignoring it. Outside, the fog was lifting, and a thin sunlight broke through the clouds. Holmes stood for a long while, watching the street lamps fade into pallor. You see, Watson, he said at last, the emerald has fulfilled its destiny. It revealed every soul that sought to possess it and left them poorer for the attempt. Sir Alistair's smile was the final irony. A man who lost everything yet contrived to win the one thing his enemies never could, peace. We returned to Baker Street in silence. That night, as I prepared to leave, I saw him at his desk, writing the title upon the latest entry in his casebook. The ink glistened darkly in the lamplight, the case of the man who smiled after death. He closed the book, and for once his face softened. There are crimes, Watson, he said, that end with the gallows and others that end with understanding. This was of the latter kind. Let us be content with that. And as I stepped out into the misty air, I thought how fitting it was that the final chapter of the affair should end not in bitterness, but in reflection. That the smile which had begun it all now lingered faint but unbroken, like a candle refusing to die in the wind. It was late in the evening when the case of the man who smiled after death finally found its quiet rest. Outside, the air was crisp with a light rain that fell upon Baker Street in a steady rhythm, like the ticking of a patient clock marking the end of a long, intricate movement. Holmes had been silent for nearly an hour, seated before the fire, his gaze lost somewhere between reflection and fatigue. I, for my part, had been finishing my notes which even now seemed inadequate to capture the strange blend of tragedy and grace that had pervaded the affair from its first moment to its last. When at length Holmes spoke, his voice was softer than usual, almost contemplative. "Do you know, Watson," he said, "I have always believed that logic alone could navigate the labyrinth of human affairs. And yet in this case it was not reason that solved the mystery, but understanding. Sir Alistair Penruddock outwitted all of us, not by cunning, but by compassion. He forgave before we could accuse, planned for truth before we even suspected falsehood. A man of conscience,
murdered by those who mistook mercy for weakness. There lies the irony that even deduction cannot measure. I nodded, remembering the photograph, the serene face, the faint, knowing smile. You think he foresaw everything, even Kent's end? Holmes inclined his head. He foresaw enough. His preparations were not for revenge, but for revelation. Each person connected to his death carried the seeds of their own ruin. He knew that the guilt of one would expose the corruption of the others. Even the emerald, stolen twice, served its purpose in unmasking the final culprit. His smile was no enigma, Watson. It was the peace of a man who had already seen the future unfold. He reached for the violin lying on the side table and turned it thoughtfully in his hands. There is a certain symmetry in it all. The poisoners dead by his own despair, the deceivers stripped of their illusions, the innocent redeemed through suffering. The pattern, once seen, is perfect, and yet I find no triumph in it. Nor should you, I said quietly. For once, the solution brings no joy, only the knowledge that justice and sorrow often walk hand in hand. Holmes gave a faint smile, more weary than proud. Quite so, and perhaps that is why Sir Alistair smiled. He understood what most men never do, that truth is not always victory, nor is mercy weakness. It is, in its own way, the highest form of justice. The fire crackled softly between us, throwing shifting shadows across the walls. I thought of Lady Eugenia in her country solitude, of the cursed emerald buried once more in the earth, of the Darnley Club closing its doors to whispers it could no longer silence. London, in its indifferent way, had already forgotten the affair, but I, who had walked through every step of it beside Holmes, knew that some stories do not end, they merely grow quiet. After a while, Holmes rose and crossed to the window. The street outside shimmered with the sheen of rain, the gas lights glowing dimly through the mist. "It is curious," he said at last, "how often death becomes the one honest thing in a web of deceit." Sir Alistair smiled because he had stripped away pretense, because for him the truth was no longer hidden. Perhaps that is why we spend our lives chasing mysteries, Watson, not for the thrill of solving them, but for the brief moment when truth stands naked and unashamed before us. He turned back, his expression unreadable, and set the violin beneath his chin. The first notes that filled the room were slow, almost mournful, yet not without beauty, a melody that seemed to drift between resignation and grace. I sat listening, feeling the tension of weeks dissolve into that haunting refrain. When the final chord faded, it left behind a silence so profound that even the ticking of the clock felt intrusive. Holmes laid the instrument aside and looked toward me. "You will write it, of course," he said simply. "But do not dwell upon the poison or the jewel. Write, instead of the man who smiled, and why." "I shall," I promised, and I did. That night, as I set my pen to paper, I found myself writing not merely of crime and deduction, but of something far deeper, the strange mercy that had shaped the entire affair. I wrote of a man who, betrayed and dying, chose forgiveness over vengeance, of a detective who found humility in the shadow of genius, and of a world where truth, however delayed, still finds its way through fog and darkness. When I finally laid down my pen, the first light of dawn crept through the curtains. Holmes had fallen asleep in his chair, the faintest trace of a smile upon his lips, an echo, perhaps, of the one that had begun it all. I sat watching him for a long while, until the sound of the rain faded and the city awoke. So ended the case of the man who smiled after death, a case not of crime alone, but of conscience. And though many years have passed since that autumn morning, I have never forgotten Holmes's final words as we parted. There is no riddle in the world so profound as the human heart, Watson. It deceives, it suffers, it forgives, and in the end, it smiles.